Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I'm so grateful that you are here for this Catalyst full moon forecast, where we go over the main astrological themes for the weeks ahead, for the 2 weeks following, in this case, our full moon in Sagittarius, also conjunct the star Antares, the heart of the Scorpion. So, first and foremost, special shout out to Catalyst members. Without your investment in yourself and certainly in me, and this platform, there would be no platform. There would be no Catalyst Energy. So special shout out and thank you to you guys. Of course, to my subscribers, welcome back. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting me, supporting Catalyst Energies, really just supporting yourself in your own spiritual development. And of course, if you're new here, thank you. Welcome. And if you find this content valuable in any way, you might want to consider subscribing, hitting the notification bell, and everybody is encouraged to like, share, and comment in order to help this channel or this social media profile grow and reach a wider audience. So with that all being said, let's jump right into this astrology for this upcoming full moon. So yes, we are in the zodiac signs of Gemini and Sagittarius. We have some very notable connections to royal fixed stars with this particular full moon. We have the full moon itself conjunct the star Antares, so I'm going to share that with you here in a moment and really start diving into the imagery and the energy associated with this full moon. So I know, and just like the rest of you, I know that we're all kind of in some ways hanging by a thread, really doing our best to navigate the contention that we are living with, whatever that contention is, whether it's personal within ourselves, whether it's relationships, whether it's in our job, our work situation, our career, and certainly at the macro level, right? Political, national, international, right? Geopolitical, all of that stuff from the macro down to the micro. We are all feeling it. So whatever that polarity is, whatever that contention is, just to remind all of ourselves, including me, that it's in that contention and the friction that's created from going back and forth between two opposing positions, right? That friction is exactly the energy that catalyzes and transforms us. And so this full moon is really highlighting that. And with every full moon, we are tasked with taking that illumination and that clarification from the full moon and consciously applying it to our situation, especially whatever our intentions were with the new moon. So if we go back just a little bit, we had our new moon in the late degrees of Taurus. It was conjunct the Pleiades. It was conjunct Algol, or the head of the Gorgon or Medusa. And we identified that it's really about the spiritual warriorship emerging over the course of the month ahead. So it's the new moon is always a time of silence and stillness. The seed is just planted, and then it starts to germinate and grow and face obstacles. And when we get to a full moon, our purpose is clarified, it's illuminated. But then we, as conscious beings, can't really shove ourselves back into the seed. You know what I mean? So we have to keep moving, and we have to consciously apply that illumination and that clarification from the full moon to the intentions that we had set for this new moon, which makes the second half of the lunar cycle, I think, a little bit more difficult. Not to say it hasn't been difficult up to this point, but it's taking this perspective that has been illuminated and our purpose that has been clarified and applying that the rest of the next 2 weeks. Okay, so we're going to get into, the fixed star Antares. We're going to talk a little bit more about Procyon, because one of the highlights, I would say, of this next 2 weeks is that Venus and Jupiter are going to be conjunct in Cancer, and that is conjunct the star Procyon. So there's a lot of fixed star energy, which oftentimes translates into a lot of starseed energy going into this full moon and beyond. Another one of the really big transits, something we've been talking about for weeks, if not longer, in the Catalyst membership. A lot of personal readings have been directed here. And certainly if you had a fire horse reading or an eclipse forecast with me, you know that this time period in general, June, July into August, is really where things are starting to not just manifest, but surface, and the difficulties that have been kind of under the surface that started with the fire horse year, that started with the eclipse cycle, is now starting to make its way up to the surface. And so the challenges that we have been working with internally, some have been kind of a shock, some have been things that we've known are coming, but are starting to really apply a pressure, right? You can really feel it. And I feel like the apex of that is this T-square with Uranus and Gemini and the nodes of the moon. So we just had a first quarter moon last weekend, and one person had said to me about last weekend, it was a messy weekend. And I would attribute that, at least partially, to this first quarter moon because it was in Virgo. And its square to the sun in Gemini created a harmonic, right? The same degrees that Uranus and the South Node are in square with this T-square. So when we look at the chart, I'll be able to, if you're kind of lost or you're not really sure what all of these astrological aspects mean, on this channel, I don't just give you my forecasting and prediction and then we move on and you don't do any of the work, right? It's really about explaining to you, what are these aspects? What do they mean? How do they translate into maybe your life so you can use the astrology as a means to have at least a leg up. So that T-square is really big, and it's actually becoming much more present as of now because Uranus has moved into the 3rd degree of Gemini, which is where this T-square is exact, is the 3rd degree, but also too, the harmonic with the first quarter moon, I think, was really present. It was very personal, right? First quarter moons are always a crisis point in action. What do I do? There's always some sort of contention, certainly, and some friction there. And as it was personal there, it's going to, I think, translate out into something that is much more, I don't want to say not personal, but something that spreads out to be more of a collective issue, right? But we've all started to feel it in our personal lives. And it's been building now for a couple of weeks. There's no doubt about it. Now, this full moon, there's a lot of ways that we can really harness this energy for good. And I'm going to kind of go into the dichotomy or the axis of this full moon because you have the sun conjunct Aldebaran, and then you have the moon conjunct Antares, right? So these are two royal fixed stars. You have Archangel Michael on one hand and Archangel Uriel on the other hand. So there is a lot here. But the Venus-Jupiter conjunction with Procyon, I think, is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's usually, and these two benefic planets, whenever they come into a favorable transit with each other, and in this case, a conjunction, it's usually a really nice thing. It really is going to influence us for the most part, positively in terms of just hope and optimism and a sense of real value to nurturing that which is really important to us, which is our root system. So our families and our homes and our traditions and all of those kind of Cancerian elements. It does have a strong connection to the U.S. natal chart. There's a lot of Cancer in the U.S. natal chart, and this late degrees of Cancer, I believe, is the natal Mercury of the U.S. chart. So, I'm not going to get into all of that in this particular forecast, but just to say that particular transit, I think, is going to be very beneficial, and it will really highlight quite a bit of positivity, I think, for all of us. So the thing with Antares, it could go either way because this is a star of war. It really is a star of war, star of battle. And if you are unconscious or you are taken that nosedive, so to speak, with not the best intentions in mind, this full moon could have really backfired. And the best case scenario here is that, if it has backfired, that you have the wherewithal to be like, whoa, I pushed that way too far, and look how it backfired on me and boomeranged. So I'll give you an example of that. I like to give real world examples of these astrological transits so that people understand how can utilize it. It doesn't mean that things won't happen, doesn't mean that they won't be difficult, but if you are aware that the possibility exists that you might experience something along a certain line, then you're not completely sideswiped when things do happen that are difficult. For instance, we just had Venus square Saturn. If you remember, I talked about how that was going to be a big reality check, and boy was it. It was a massive reality check, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that felt that. But I knew that was coming. In fact, that very day that I was doing the astrology, and I was like, oh, this whole situation looks like it's going to resolve, and that's really great, like in a positive way. And then I looked at it and I was like, no way. There's no way. Venus is going to square Saturn by the end of today. There's no way that the situation is resolving like this, even though on the surface, right this moment, it feels like it will. And lo and behold, I was absolutely right about that. So I'm sure I'm not the only one that had a massive reality check with that Venus square Saturn. And that was on the 28th. So we're coming into this week. We have the full moon energy in tow and is still very much present for the next couple of days. And we have some challenges, but we also have some very rooted and powerful energy to help us along as well. So I'm going to bring up let's see if I'm looking at the right. Yes, we're going to look at there we go. We're going to look at some imagery here. This is the constellation of Scorpio, and the big star in the middle is the star Antares. So I want to take some time to really break this down because this is where the full moon is. And of course, like I said, the sun in Gemini is conjunct Aldebaran, which is another star across the sky. It is the left eye of the bull and is related to Archangel Michael. The star itself of Antares has a lot, like I said, has a lot of connections to war, right? The rival of Mars, because it has this red color to it. And it also, so it has the nature of Mars, but also Mars does rule the sign of Scorpio. And so there's a very strong connection to this type of battle energy going to war, really asserting our power that comes along with Antares, right? And so, it often is an indicator of success in war and high command. But as long as you realize that the opponent or the opposing energy here is one that is related to Archangel Michael, which is, he was the head of the heavenly army. So it's not without its challenges. But that's exactly, as I said many times over, that it's in the contention, it's in the battle, it's in the dichotomy that we are dealing with. That friction is what creates the transforming or alchemical fire, right? Is the catalyzing fire. So think about the heart of the Scorpion. It is very intense, right? What does tend to show up, especially when these two are engaged with each other, as they are with this full moon, is a conflict, either the starting date of the war or, of the people that are involved in it. And it's not like that we haven't been working with this energy globally already. So I wouldn't be surprised if we find that something escalates at this time period out in the geopolitical realm, okay? And peace rarely ensues before the total and crushing defeat of one side or the other, because you're talking about the Scorpion, right? Once that Scorpion stings, the poison spreads, and that's kind of the end there. So, and it is a war that escalates to huge proportions, even to a world scale, as aggressive Mars is precedent over expansive Jupiter, right? And this is because in ancient astrology, fixed star astrology, Antares has this Mars-Jupiter type, which is an indicator of success in war and high command. So, but war is not the only outlet for this symbolism. And I think that's where it's really going to come into view for us here, right? Certainly we can use the astrology to forecast and predict these larger global changes, obviously, but it's not the only outlet for the symbolism of Antares, and this is where it's going to apply to us the most. And it indicates just as often the individual's great store of energy and optimism to undertake ventures that others could not attempt, right? And so I do have a little bit of shamanic animal messaging that is really relevant to this that I'm going to bring back in once I kind of finish summarizing here. So, again, it just gives that energy and optimism. And optimism is very much related to the sign of Sagittarius. Now, if you're confused, like, oh, wait, it's in Sagittarius, but it's in Scorpio, I don't get it. So if you're confused by that, let me explain. Sidereal astrology has to do with the actual location of the planets and the bodies in relation to the actual constellations and the stars, right? And so the moon is moving through Scorpio in terms of sidereal astrology. Western astrology or tropical astrology takes the vernal equinox, which is that moment when there is equal light and dark at the eastern horizon, and marks that as 0 degrees Aries, and everything else is equally proportioned around the circumference of our sky in equal 30 degrees sections, and each of those sections is the zodiac sign, right? So you have the zodiac sign in the degree of 10 degrees Sagittarius based on where the vernal equinox is, and that happens to right now at this point in time be in alignment with the Scorpio constellation and specifically the star Antares. So that's why there's a difference here. And you weave these different systems together into a very rich and textured tapestry astrologically. Not everybody does that, and it's not exactly an easy feat. And I'm learning as I go along how to read all of this anyway. So that's, the optimism connected to the sign of Sagittarius is very much part of this as well. And this is what we can use this energy for, is to have that energy and optimism to really take a risk and to take a nosedive into something that maybe we've never done before. And again, to undertake ventures that others could not attempt, right? So it depends, the planets involved and what houses they're in, that it's going to impact. But the idea here, and you're talking about like really big ventures, right? Exploring Antarctica and achievements and hazardous kinds of scientific research at the extreme of human knowledge. This is all coming from Astrology King, by the way. Great website for fixed star breakdowns. So, in classical astrology, Antares is a star of war and weaponry and tenacious adamancy. That's an interesting word. This is especially in regard to taking a stand against the established conditions of our personal lives and against the established order of authority. So you may find that this full moon is really highlighting this drive to take a stand against the established conditions of our personal lives, especially the ones that we want to change. And that, there's a sense of really being willing to kind of take the nosedive, right? To go from one position and take a drastic different position in order to achieve something. If we're less aware, it can destroy us, right? And I'm going to give you a good example. Antares marks a point of empowerment. And if you've embraced your initiation and claimed your self-empowerment, this is, and really graduated from playing the victim in your entrapments, then, and taking responsibility for reality, then this is an incredible full moon that's really going to motivate us to take responsibility and take a stand for truth, right, in our lives. And so all of us are working with this in our own way, okay? And I think this is the best possible scenario here for Antares. Now, two stories. One, in terms of like taking risks and accomplishing things that people maybe not are able to do. The shamanic message that I received this week was that now that the summer is happening, there's the garter snakes that live under our porch is starting to show themselves. They're starting to emerge, right? Well, I have cats that go outside, and felines are one of the primary predators of snakes and serpents. And so found this little garter snake. It was starting to make its way out, and it basically just gave up right in my front yard. And when I looked closer, at first I thought it was just chilling, but when it didn't move for like a day and a half, I was like, the snake is gone, right? And then I looked at it and I was like, wow, it's gotten slashed. And I realized that my cat probably was its predator. And it's a really strong connection to Lyra, because the feline energy is really connection to Lyra and Lyra star seeds, and then the Draco energy too. And so there was this kind of like overcoming of the negative aspects of the serpent with the heart of the feline, right? The tenacity and the power of that Lyran energy. So that's one thing to embrace here in this moment. So my example here of how this full moon and how this tenacity and this intensity actually can go sideways for somebody, right? If they are not really grounded, if they're not taking responsibility for themselves. So I was told a story actually just this morning. I'm kind of glad that I waited till today to record this because, yes, it's a little late, but still, the full moon is still very present right now. I was told a story about an individual who has been casually dating someone for a number of months and wants it to go further, but this person, the other person that they've been seeing, is clearly not interested in having it go any further. But yet they still continue to hang out on occasionally. Well, this person in question knew that the person they were interested in and casually seeing was going to this country music concert. And so this person in question decided they were going to go to the country music concert and find out if this person was maybe seeing someone else or is there with someone else, in a way that was like trying to push the issue. Well, they showed up, the person that they are interested in was really put off and actually had the event staff remove the person in question because they felt like that this person was stalking them, which is pretty much what happened, what was happening. So you can see that in that sense of like, I'm going to push this agenda forward, really feeling emboldened. And the heart of the scorpion, right? It's something that is deep and driven to take this to take this chance, take this risk, to do this thing. And it did not work out. In fact, it probably is going to, if this person doesn't back off, it's probably going to escalate into something more. So that's an example of how this energy can influence people or aggravate a situation when they are not, when they're not really self-aware, when they're not taking responsibility for how they feel and the direction of their life, when they can't take a hint in some cases, right? And there's lots of different reasons. So that's an example of how that could go sideways. So this full moon with Antares has a fiery, warlike energy to it, but it also has exactly the type of energy and optimism to really push through and to achieve something and to really, really break through into something more. And a lot of that has to do with being willing to take the risk, to change position, to take the nosedive, right? To kind of commit to something irrevocably, knowing that there's no half measure there, right? You're either in it to win it or you're not. And then you get stung by the scorpion in a different way, right? And I'm sure all of us listening or watching this can probably relate to this in some way personally, or certainly have been observing it in other people and on the world stage. So I am curious to see how things unfold, at the global level with this full moon conjunct Antares that's got such a powerful connection to the process of war and battle. So that's our full moon taking us through the next 2 weeks here. So I'm going to stop the share here, and we're going to move on now to talking about Procyon or Procyon, because I do feel like this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is going to be a really nice, something really to look forward to, especially because of the T-square with Uranus and the nodes of the moon that will be exact later in this process. In fact, let me look at the date here because I have it right in front of me. Oh, something else that is happening right now that I will bring up is the fact that, so we're talking about the 9th, 10th, and the 11th. So after the third quarter moon. So we have our third quarter moon on, it looks like the 8th, right? So next weekend, or towards the end of next weekend. And then from there, we have a lot of bigger transits that are going to be happening, right? Venus conjunct Jupiter on the 9th, Mercury in a square to Saturn on the 10th, and then the 11th is when the T-square between Uranus and the nodes is exact. So it's already building, and we can certainly feel it. And that's really where I think I'm going to end, is that T-square, because that's going to be, the thing, and it's building now, that's really going to initiate breaking free of old and outdated types of ways of doing things, right? As Uranus usually does. But this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is really, really nice. So let's talk about Procyon, right? The star of Procyon. And I'm going to, let's see, I'll bring up an image. Can I bring up an image of it? It's kind of hard to see because it's in the small dog, the lesser dog star of Procyon. If Sirius is the dog star in Canis Major, then Procyon or Procyon is the major star in the little dog, right? So it designates all kinds of fun things, but here this is coming from astrologyking.com. Like I said, a great website for fixed star astrology in terms of what all the fixed stars mean, and many, many resources and references, and then also the degree, the Western astrology degree of where that star is currently. So great resource. I highly recommend it. And that's what I'm going to be reading from with Procyon. So it gives activity and violence and sudden and violent malevolence, right? That seems kind of interesting considering how great this conjunction actually is. So, but it's important to realize and be aware of the negative aspects of what this represents for all of us. So let's see here. You know, it can make people hasty and jealous, this particular star, but it also confers willpower and an ability to put thoughts and plans into action. Okay, so now you have this sense with Antares that's really that fire, that smoldering ember is really getting blown up, right? It's like blowing the bell, squeezing the bellows onto the fire, and the flame is like shooting up and you're basically stoking the fire. That's what this feels like, this full moon. So you put on top of that a tendency towards a hot temper, potentially with Procyon, but it also confers, like I said, willpower and ability to put thoughts and plans into action. Rise and success are found with it, but there can be a fall from high position if things are created in haste, right? Enterprises created in haste, they don't last. People who want to go through the wall with their head only injure themselves, right? It gives drive and a sharp mind, and success is made greater as long as you are not going into something hasty. Now, the thing about this full moon in Antares, the fact that the sun is conjunct Gemini, there can be a hastiness involved in our decisions. So this conjunction also could really highlight how, maybe there is short-term success. Maybe you did, go through the wall with your head, and then you realize that I've only hurt myself. Let's see here. What else do we have? Sometimes it's called the Northern Sirius, and so it's interesting. It's also the name of the navigator and the steersman on the ship Argo, right? So if you remember, Jason and the Argonauts, the search for the Golden Fleece, the quest for true knowledge, the gold of the alchemist, the knowledge of our origins, of what happened to make us who we are now. I mean, that also is, you are steering, navigating towards that. That's what Procyon or Procyon represents. So Procyon never steered his companions to that goal in life, for man was not then ready to find it. That's very interesting. So Procyon also is one of the 15 Bohemian fixed stars, and so it has a kind of magical quality to it as well. It gives favor of the gods, spirits, and men, power against witchcraft, and preserves health, right? That's very interesting. This restless and hot-tempered yellowish white star seeks release in fast and furious action, bestowing a strong physical drive and a sharp mind. Rise and success are granted by this feisty star, but only if patience is practiced and good judgment exercised. So you have this particular transit with Venus and Jupiter coming, and you have it within the window of a full moon conjunct Antares. So the potential here in this, and then you have the Uranus T-square the nodes, right? That is going to, shift and change things up rapidly and unexpectedly in order to facilitate the releasing of old and outdated ways of doing things. So there is a lot of energy that is really supporting us in basically escaping terminal velocity, if you want to think about it that way, escaping gravity in some ways, defying gravity in some ways, in order to get where we really want to go. Anger issues and unresolved pain from the past are indicated with Procyon. It's a good thing, as there is a huge chance these lessons are used to better oneself. And so the idea here that growth comes from not doing something you already know how to do, but doing something that, you have never done before and succeeding at it. This is really the focus here, I would say, of this full moon. It explores our already given talents to new heights, right? We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here, but only if we embrace our inner truth and live that truth. Again, this is kind of goes along with the full moon Antares, that we're willing to stand up for ourselves, stand up for our truth. And then you have Venus and Jupiter coming into conjunction with each other at Procyon, that is, again, giving us the energy to embrace our inner truth and live it. And it indicates creative events and community gatherings, a time to share our talents. Remember that any enterprise created in haste will not last, but those who plan and wait will be rewarded with victory. So enticing change through the chaos is at our lowest point, where we are open to the greatest change, right? And so there is a lot of chaos, but there's also a lot of ways where, if we're unconscious, if we are not being honest with ourselves about our wounds, if we haven't been doing the Chiron work at all, then this full moon is really kind of, enticing people and charging people into doing things. However, Saturn, I would say, is not going to be too kind. So let's look at the actual astrology chart itself, and let's kind of go the play-by-play over the next 2 weeks, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with some of these things. So let's share the chart. Okay, we're going to format this correctly so that you can see it. And this is our chart of the full moon itself. So which you can see, the sun in Sagittarius is opposite of the sun in Gemini. So let's see what else I have here. And Mercury, as of today, is also now in Cancer. So Mercury had been in its home territory of Gemini, like the thoughts have just been all over the place. I know people have been having a hard time sleeping. The Schumann has been very active. It's starting to settle down again for now. There's a big coronal hole facing us. That means we're going to get solar wind enhancement. So just be aware of that. But the Mercury in Gemini, it's just like the thoughts back and forth all over the place, right? Now it's coming to Cancer. And so our mental energy and our conscious awareness and even our nervous systems, right? Making a decision, a point of no return, right? You're planting your flag and you are making a decision of where you belong and what you're going to invest yourself emotionally into, right? And so in some ways, it kind of forces us mentally to be like, enough with the back and forth, make a decision and stick to it. And this will be where you can funnel all of this hot and contentious energy in order to achieve something, to overcome something, right? This is the best use of this full moon energy. So now it often will come through some sort of crisis event, right? The plunge into an experience with complete disregard of the consequences. And sometimes a crisis will trigger that, right? That we just take that nosedive and we're like, okay, well, this thing is happening and I need to just make a decision and go for it with the expectation that you will be able to, right the ship or pull the nose of the nosediving plane up when the time is right. But it is a very advantageous reorientation of our selfhood, right? And so there are issues that challenge us. They throw us off course. They destroy our confidence in a lot of ways, and there's so many things outside of us that continue to push us down. So this particular full moon is like, you know what? The capacity to plunge into the experience, right? Now, again, that's not necessarily a good thing across the board. It just depends on what experience you're willing to plunge yourself into. And the complete disregard of consequence could be something that backfires, as I've already explained. So that's the full moon. The other thing that has happened at the full moon is that the moon then moved past this position and was in a trine with Saturn. Now, Saturn is at a really interesting position at 13 degrees Aries. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring it forward a tick so you can visually see that particular transit. So it's just waiting for it to, there we go. And you can see that trine now, hopefully that trine is building with Saturn. Now Saturn is, like I said, is at a very interesting degree of Aries. It is the Sabian symbol of 13 degrees Aries, is an unexploded bomb, reveals an unsuccessful social protest. Now we are in Aries, right? All piss and vinegar. And Saturn is at its fall position in Aries, right? So it either gets more restrictive or the restrictions are starting to go out the window. However, this particular degree is something that Saturn's going to be like, listen, if this is not the full extent of your accomplishment, then they will be dramatically rejected. So no matter how much expenditure you put into a situation to try to change it, if it is not a very deep or hallowed purpose, or if you are attempting to exercise this through some sort of petulance or vanity, for instance, then Saturn is just going to stomp that out. And I feel like this moon in Sag, right after the full moon, in a trine to Saturn like this, it's very encouraging. And yes, it is difficult, and there is a certain amount of agony of the soul that this position of 13 Sagittarius represents. But at the same time, the trine to Saturn, right, a moon Saturn trine, it's very stabilizing emotionally with something that is very structured and reinforced, which is like, yes, you are having kind of this sense of individual agony. Maybe the karma of past actions are affecting the opportunities that are presented by a new cycle. But Saturn's going to be like, unless this is the full purpose, if anything is falling short of like the full purpose that you have for yourself, then Saturn is just going to squash it. And I think that as difficult as it might be to emotionally, feel that and contend with that, that's exactly the type of energy that really stabilizes and matures us emotionally to be like, you know what? The reason that didn't happen the way I wanted is because it was falling short of the full purpose or the entirety of what it is that I am attempting to accomplish. So I find that trine, as difficult as it was, is also very important. And yeah, Saturn is just like dad putting its foot down and just being like, nah, no, you might be destructive and that's great, but it's not going to be the thing that changes everything. If you're going to be petulant and try to force the issue because it's not going the way that you want, Saturn is going to put the foot down. And this particular moon trine Saturn at the time of the full, like right after the full moon, I think is a very important and emotionally stabilizing moment. It's not easy. There's nothing easy around Saturn because it's just a harsh truth a lot of the times, but it also is kind of the structure that surrounds us and supports us in order for us to make that change or fall apart in order to build ourselves back up, right? Mercury comes into Cancer, that's today. And there's a lot of aspects with Mercury in early Cancer that are going to be happening throughout the week. It's going to trine the North Node. It's going to square Neptune, which is always a nice little reality check. As well, and then the quincunx to Pluto all through the week. So just the ways that our minds have maybe stabilized and rooted ourselves into a position or a decision is going to have all kinds of connections to the larger things, the transpersonal energies, the nodes of the moon, which are about the soul, Neptune and Pluto, which are transpersonal. So our individual consciousness, our minds, our nervous systems, kind of stabilizing emotionally, putting our roots down, it's going to have all kinds of, in the case of Neptune and Pluto, as we're going to see here, I'll show it to you when we move forward here. What you're going to see here is that there will be challenge to where we've made our decision. Ooh, yeah, I'm really feeling that one. And to not be deterred, right? That's what this whole full moon is really about, is that we have access to that incredible energy and optimism to really push through and accomplish something we really want, something that we want to commit to, that is going to fulfill our lives with a very deep purpose, okay? But yes, as Mercury is moving through Cancer, it's going to square Neptune, it's going to quincunx Pluto, but it will have a positive connection to that Pisces North Node that really does suggest to me that the trajectory for all of us at this time at a soul level is compassion, unconditional love, a sense of communion with God or spirit, and really surrendering ourselves to that, because that is really where true spiritual communion happens, is in the realm of Pisces, right? And there's something to be said for all this Virgo energy with the South Node, which is, precision and practicality and discipline and patience with our own process. And we've done that, right? That's what the South Node's all about, the mastery around those practices and perfecting ourselves. But we can't stay there, and we have to align ourselves with something more than just that practice, because otherwise it just turns into rote repetition or just drudgery, with the sixth house and Virgo. If you're just doing it for the sake of doing it and there's no release or surrender into the communion with God or source in that process, then that's where it just becomes dogmatic, right? So Mercury coming into Cancer, like I said, our minds, our nervous systems, we kind of are starting to root ourselves, but there will be a challenge with these larger energies, Pluto and Neptune, over the next couple of days. And don't be deterred. It's okay to feel that friction and that internal imbalance, because this is where the work happens, right? And so no matter what, whenever you make a decision and you plant that flag and situate yourself into some place, right? And, where's Cancer in your chart? That's going to tell you what area of life this is really coming up in. There are going to be challenges to larger cycles and more collective energy. And that's something we're all going to feel in the next couple of days with Mercury moving through early Cancer. So it's going to be, like I said, that third quarter moon on the 8th, right? And then Venus and Jupiter conjunct on the 9th. And I'm just going to show it to you on the chart because we've already talked about it. And you can see that the Uranus T-square is already building, right? You can see it in the chart, that T-square. So those outdated structures, here we go. Those outdated structures, especially in terms of the South Node energy, right? Where we've been, what we've mastered, what we need to leave behind or use as our momentum pushing us forward. It's really going to come out of the tension from Uranus making rapid, unexpected shifts in our mind and information. I mean, this is what we're talking about with Gemini, right? And with every T-square, as I've said, when the way to make the most of it is, yes, it's all pointing down to this point of Uranus at 2 to 3 degrees Gemini, but the ghost point is Sagittarius, again, which is all of that friction, all of that contention, all of those positions of back and forth, this and that, past and future, all of that friction is what creates the catalyzing fire of transformation, which is what we're doing, right? We're growing, and that requires that type of energy in order to make those changes, in order to grow and to transform. So, and to be able to transcend the conflict. You're not saying that it doesn't exist. There's no bypassing here of conflict. There's no putting your head in the sand, but there has to be some measure of transcending the conflict, like you're playing a game of chess. You know that there's a conflict, there's two sides to it. You are engaged in the process. You know that there's going to be a winner on either side, but you're not getting personally involved in the conflict itself. You realize it's in the playing of the game that there is something more generated here, which is that ghost point in Sagittarius. So this is, what date are we looking at here? We're looking at the 9th, right? So this is next week. So this is when I anticipate next week. So we have this T-square really building. We have the conjunction with Venus and Jupiter in late degrees of Cancer. Remember all the things I just talked about with Procyon or Procyon, right? That, when you make hasty decisions, it's basically going to go wrong. But we also know that this is the energy that steers us towards that alchemical transformation, right? The steersman for the Argo, right? It was Procyon, navigating through the dangerous territory in order to come to a greater understanding of who we are, what our place in the cosmos is, and, our relationship to God or spirit or source, right? So we're all here, as far as I can tell, for spiritual development. So let's see what else is happening here. I mean, you can see that there are favorable aspects to the nodes with Black Moon Lilith up here in Capricorn. And these are the types of transits actually that I explore more definitively in the membership. I have a page that is the Astro Vibe Check, and these are more daily astrology notes and musings and check-ins with people. And this is the type of stuff that I would go into more detail about as they arise and as the energy becomes more accessible to me, on a daily basis, right? Because that's a lot of how I read astrology. Yes, it's very left brain and you understand all the aspects and what everything means symbolically and how it all fits together, and you can kind of come to reasonable conclusions. But for an intuitive reader like me, I just, I feel into these transits, and then I get the impressions that kind of sum up the narrative of what they represent. And so as things go along, I have more access to the energy of those transits, especially in relation to specific people or specific situations. So that's just a little plug for Catalyst membership. One of the many benefits is access to these dailies. They're not technically dailies because they're not every day, but they are focusing on the astrological energy on a daily basis as I check in. So that's something that gets uploaded to the membership site, and you have access to it whenever I put it up. And it's just one of the many benefits of Catalyst membership. So, and all of that is in the description box below, or you can access it from the website. If you're watching this on social media, that website link is somewhere on the profile. So really, I don't have anything else to add to this other than towards the end here, we also have Mercury and Saturn coming into a square And again, we want to exercise our will in shaping our character with Mercury here coming into alignment with Sirius, by the way, the star Sirius. So you have the larger dog, the dog star, squaring Saturn. But this is really, again, just going to kind of make our mental energy, our thought process, and the way that we approach the themes related to Cancer, which is home, family, root power, our sense of feeling of belonging, right? It's just going to make those conversations and that thought process that much more serious. It might, Saturn, of course, is basically what it seems like it comes down to is that Mercury is like, I'm going to use the will to shape my character, whatever that is. And Saturn's going to be like, no half measures exist here, right? If this is, it will be rejected. If it is, if you're using the will to shape your character in a way that falls short, right? So again, it's all keeping us honest all along the way of how to fulfill a very deep purpose for ourselves that is only in alignment only with the highest purpose, right? Which can be very difficult when we haven't really teased out what is just a individual desire that is born out of our trauma or our victimhood, and certainly all of those Chiron themes, and what is a deep purpose and a desire coming out of that. So again, Mercury square Saturn, it's just going to make that conversation that much more serious and intense and keep us honest with ourselves as well. And then speaking of Chiron, right before the next new moon, so we're talking about the balsamic moon phase. So this is going to be on the 13th of June, right before the next new moon. And you can see that Venus, right before moving into Leo, is going to talk about the lioness, right? That energy just came up really strongly. My husband today was like, if you could be any animal in the zodiac, like right now, would you be? And the first thing that came to me actually was just like, I'd be like, I don't know why, I'm just really feeling this Leo energy and the lioness. And now Venus coming into Leo, I was like, that is exactly who that is, the lioness, Venus coming into Leo. And that's going to be happening at the balsamic moon, coming into the next new moon, but she's going to square Chiron, also at the last degree of Aries. And this will be kind of like I don't want to call it the cherry on top necessarily, but it's going to bring out what is really valuable to each of us. What is valuable in terms of what's worth holding on to, what traditions, what types of family cohesion, what bonds, that's really what Cancer is about. I mean, yes, it's about how we feel, it's about home and family, but it's about the bonds that are created. Just like the root system of a plant is bonded to the soil, to the medium of the growth, right? So this Venus square Chiron, it feels like as it's, it's going to come into these last degrees of Cancer and Aries, and this cardinal square is really going to bring out, I think, what is valuable in terms of those bonds, what is worth holding on to and what isn't, right? And with Chiron in the last degree of Aries, I mean, it's going to be the realization of these natural boundaries, right? And what is worth and meaningful and valuable about those bonds and those boundaries, because maybe some of these boundaries do need to dissolve, right? Maybe some of them need to be strengthened. I feel like this particular square with Venus and Chiron at the end of this lunar cycle is really going to highlight that in a way that might be very painful, right? Anytime you talk about Chiron and certainly a difficult transit like a square or an opposition, you are kind of poking at the wound, so to speak. And when you're talking about Venus and Cancer, it really is the bonds, the emotional bonds that mean the most to us. And that could be our bonds to our nation, or it could be the bonds to our family. It just depends on how you're looking at it and what's relevant for you right now. I do feel like it'll be a little bit painful, but at the same time, I also get a sense that it'll be like a release, right? Like you can't hold on to everything. And there are some things that need to be let go of, and there's just only so much that you can hold on to. And there is a necessity to realize natural boundaries. And so in that case, there may be things that are so outdated that you're holding on to something that has run its course. And I do feel like that we're going to get that sense come the end of this lunar cycle with Venus square Chiron. And then Venus moves into Leo, and then we have our new moon in Gemini, which will be an Orion starseed lunar cycle. So, all right, my friends, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you all so very much. If you found, as I said, if you find any value in this, if it has helped you in any way, please consider like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when I upload. You can get on my email list so you can get anything ahead of time in terms of special reports and reading sales that I offer. And of course, Catalyst membership. That's the best way to get more consistent readings and check-ins and your own dedicated discount code as well for any of the items on my website store. So friends, thank you so much for everything and enjoy this full moon energy, right? It is definitely a turbocharge. It's not coming without some difficulty, but just realize that it is exactly the type of energy we probably really need to motivate us and to, like I said, to really push us in the direction of what it is, how we're evolving, how we're transforming, right? How we are attempting to accomplish something, and with some optimism too. And sometimes we just really need to tap into that raw energy, the heart of the scorpion, in order to do that. So if you need to get a hold of me, you know how to find me. My email is in the description box below, or you can send me a DM through Telegram or Facebook, and I'll see you on this channel in 2 weeks, but Catalyst membership, I'll see you way sooner than that. So take care, everyone. Enjoy the full moon. I hope everyone is feeling as peaceful and grounded as they can, but also allowing themselves to really feel that charge and that surge of energy in order to accomplish something meaningful. So the collective needs you. Right? That's the thing. What we do personally does affect and influence everybody else in this beautiful divine fractal that we're all part of. So, all right, everyone, take care of yourselves.